right. And to any attendees that are hopping in right now, we'll be getting started momentarily. Excellent. All right, friends. Well, I'm going to get started right now. So first of all, good evening and welcome everyone to our advocacy night, which we haven't had in quite a bit, but here we are back at it. Now, before we dive into the meat of the agenda tonight, I actually just started sharing this via our Facebook Live on our JPEF Facebook account. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the link. I'm going to share that link in the chat for everybody to see so that you can take just a moment and share that link on your Facebook and Instagram account so that all of your buddies can tune in and see all the gloriousness that we're about to share with you this evening. So I'll take just about 60 seconds to let everybody do that, and then we'll dive right in. Okay, well, like I said, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Advocacy Night. I'm Casey Roth, and I'm delighted to have you all here with us tonight. Now, our gathering will center around the legislative session currently underway and what it means for education in Florida. To ensure that we make the most of our time together, we've designed a structured agenda that includes engaging presentations, a panel discussion, an interactive Q&A session, and if you stick around, a presentation of a delightful parent resource at the end. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our esteemed speakers and panelists for tonight. First, we have Rachel Duff, the Senior Manager of Data and Research for JPEF. She has extensive experience in education, having worked as a teacher, policy fellow, and research expert, and has a passion for leveraging data to drive transformative change in local education systems. Next, we have Vice Chair of the School Board, Cindy Pearson. Empowered by her rich background in city government and nonprofit organizations, she stands as a devoted parent volunteer, fervently committed to inspiring parents and community members to unite and champion the cause of local schools, all on top of being an elected official. And finally, our panelists for the evening. The aforementioned Vice Chair Cindy Pearson will represent our district perspective. Then we have Mr. Nick Nelson, our teacher voice. He's a Duval County native and 2022 Teacher of the Year finalist who teaches second grade at Staple Palms Elementary and serves on the Jacksonville Public Education Fund steering committee for the 1000 by 2025 initiative designed to promote diverse male teachers. And then finally, Mr. Marcus Smothers, our parent voice for the evening, who is a loving father, enthusiastic runner, and someone who fervently envisions a future where quality education is accessible to all, championing the cause of recruiting and retaining Black male educators across every classroom. So let me tell you, we're fortunate to have such knowledgeable professionals joining us tonight. So throughout the event, we encourage you to submit any questions you may have for our speakers and panelists. To do so, please just use that Q&A feature down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, which, pretty easy to access. And then our question monitors will vet the questions and they'll send them to me. And then once we get to the Q&A sessions, I'll field them to our panelists. So once again, welcome and thank you for joining us. let us get started with our first presentation. Rachel Duff, I'll pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Casey. So I'm just going to honestly do a quick overview of current bills that JPES is following. So we're seeing current legislation both being proposed and moving through the House and Senate at a surprising speed. And as far as JPEF's work, there are several bills we are following closely. You can always view our advocacy center to see, more information and sharing just like factual evidence of what's going on currently in our state. So first, regarding school boards, lawmakers are fast-tracking proposals to make local school boards elections partisan. Arguments from supporters of this effort have framed this as increasing transparency, while those opposed suggest that this is an attempt to politicize school boards. This is significant as it could be a factor in next year's school board elections. Additionally, there have been significant legislative efforts to challenge what books are available to students. Current legislation would make it easier for people to object to instructional materials in library books. The Senate has also passed a bill that would prevent union dues from being deducted out of teachers' paychecks and would reset the threshold of how many eligible employees need to be dues-paying union members for unions to maintain their certification as bargaining agents. The governor has also signed into law a measure that makes it easier for teachers to be certified, namely through GK waivers if an individual has had 3 years of support and was rated as effective or highly effective for the last 3 years, as well as extending the acceptable period of temporary certification from 3 years to 5 years. The 2022 Parental Rights and Education Law is proposed now to expand to restrict lessons on sexual orientation and gender identity from kindergarten to now 8th grade, and would impact both traditional public schools and charter schools. School vouchers for all have been approved by the legislature and signed by the governor, and would include an education savings account that would allow recipients to spend money in voucher funds on private school tuition and related fees. So that is a super high level overview of just some of the current bills going through that we're following. Again, feel free to visit our advocacy center. I think we'll drop the link in the chat where you can get more information and continue to see our analysis of bills going through the House and Senate. And I will pass it over briefly to Cindy Pearson, who's going to share a little bit more about the district's strategic goals and priorities.
Great, thank you, Rachel. We started back in the fall talking about what our priorities would be, met with Florida School Board Association, and we were successful in lobbying actually to get several Duval initiated priorities onto the FSBA platform. So what I'm going to share also is on the FSBA platform, and it is being proposed and lobbied advocated by members across the state of Florida. So we're pretty excited to get our ideas on a statewide level. The first bucket of ideas falls into workforce education. And we have two items there. One is aimed at helping us bridge the gap between what practitioners can get paid in the field versus what we're able to pay teachers. So we're asking a stipend to help bridge the gap to hire qualified people to teach our career and technical education programs. The second is a grant. We're asking for a grant program so that we can be innovative and launch new career and technical education programs. We've seen some success on that second one in SB 240. The second bucket of items has to do with school staffing shortages. We're asking to change the term of temporary certification from 3 to 5 years. That one was put into HB1 and SB 202, so it looks like that's going to happen. We're also asking for the extension of Senate Bill 896 from the 2022 session that allowed military and veterans with 60 hours to have a temporary certification. We're asking that to be extended to our paraprofessionals. That has gotten some traction as well. And lastly, we were asking to eliminate barriers to reemployment for retired teachers We did not get very far with that one because it required reconfiguring in the Florida retirement system, and that was more of a lift than people wanted. But we will continue to look for ways to re-engage our retired educators who would like to help out with our shortages, either in the classroom or as media specialists. The third bucket we're asking for falls into the early learning category, and we're asking for pre-K to be funded the same as K-12, so full-time, full week. We knew that this would be a heavy lift, but we wanted to start the conversation. And so we feel like we're so grateful for Senator Davis and Representative Nixon for introducing bills in the House and Senate on this. Those bills aren't going anywhere, but we've started the conversation, and I've been building a coalition of people locally who care very much about the expansion of pre-K. And so I feel like we have opportunity in future sessions to maybe see some of this happen. And we're also happy to volunteer Duval to pilot that. We feel like we can give data from urban, suburban, and rural schools, and we feel like we would be an excellent county to pilot that. If the state does not want to pay for everyone to go to full-time pre-K, we'd be happy to do that in Duval. The last bucket falls under school choice, and this relates to the Family Empowerment Scholarship. And it's taken a bit of work to educate our state legislators for them to understand that either implied or explicit in the legislation are duties, administrative responsibilities that districts have that are not being reimbursed. And so we're asking for split funding with Step Up for Students, which is receiving a portion of that scholarship money for their administrative responsibilities. We've calculated that it is costing the district in our staff positions and staff time about $26 per student who takes a scholarship, whether that student is leaving DCPS or has already been in a private school and is taking advantage of the scholarship. It is costing the district $26 per student who takes a scholarship. And so simply asking to be reimbursed for the expenses that we incur in our administrative responsibilities for that scholarship.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Cindy. And Rachel, I'll go ahead and pivot it right back to you to start right into the panel discussion.
Sure thing. So everyone, thank you again for joining us tonight. I'm excited to guide us through this engaging panel discussion where we will explore legislative priorities and their effects on our educational community. So Casey introduced everyone that we are going to be speaking with tonight, but just to remind everyone, our district voice will be Cindy Pearson, who will share how these priorities line up with the district's strategic goals and cater to diverse needs. We're also eager to hear from our teacher voice, Nick Nelson, who will offer his perspective on how the current education bills shape teachers' day-to-day experiences. And last but not least, our parent voice, Marcus Smothers, who will share his thoughts on how these bills tackle the needs and concerns of families and the vital role parents can play in supporting the new policies. So I'll start with Cindy. Could you share how the current legislative priorities align with the district's strategic goals in relation to things like student achievement, teacher support, and family engagement, and how these priorities address the diverse needs and concerns of the educational community?
Absolutely. Thank you. So the bucket of our workforce priorities directly relate to goal 4 in our strategic plan, which is high performing for our career and technical education programs to be recognized as high performing, and staffing that and then innovation directly play into that, to the high performing status there. The school staffing shortage bucket that we have relates to goal 1 in our strategic plan, which is moving from the bottom quartile to the top quartile in reading and writing performance of our students. We recognize that having a highly qualified teacher in the classroom is essential for student gains and student acquisition of skills and knowledge. It also relates number 2, where we'll be recognized as high performing with 96% of our schools earning a grade of A, B, or C. The third goal, early learning, also relates to goal number 1 of moving, that's the preschool, pre-K funding, same as K-12. Reading and writing, we feel like starting earlier, having more students who are able to be in a high quality, full-time pre-K program will directly impact our reading and writing scores, especially I would say in my district, District 3, which has a very high number of English language learners. I would love to get those babies into school, into a full-time program earlier. I think it would help not only our students, but I think it would help their families as well. And then also goal 3 of improving our post-secondary readiness for graduates. This may seem like a little bit of a stretch, but if you think about the book, Everything I Needed to Know in Life I Learned in Kindergarten, or the title, something like that, there's so many great skills that students can start learning through cooperative play, through conflict resolution, those things that we're calling soft skills that we're rolling into our Do Already certification that schools, high school students are doing. We can start laying the foundation for that as early as pre-K. And then lastly, the school choice item where we're asking for reimbursement for our services indirectly relates to all of our goals because if we can get reimbursed for the $26 per student that we're spending, then we can reinvest that money back into programs and a curriculum and innovation that would drive these other areas.
I'm muted. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'll go now to Nick. Nick, in your view, what aspects of the current educational bills or education bills have the potential to influence the day-to-day experience of teachers, and how might these changes contribute to better teaching practices that support student learning?
So the current bills, specifically the one about our literature and things that we can have on our shelves, that's definitely a day-to-day, just because some of the verbiage in the bill is a little bit vague, so it leaves a lot up for interpretation, especially at the teacher level. So that's more left up to the administration as to what they want to do, and we just kind of follow their lead on that. But as far as what's best educational practices and how these help, just getting the qualified educators in the building and getting those people that are, on fire for learning and, wanting to better education. That's the main thing that I take away from it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And pivoting now to Marcus, as a parent, what parts of the current education bill stand out to you in terms of addressing the needs and concerns of families, and how might they impact your family's involvement in the educational process?
Sorry, I needed to unmute. As a parent, initially you might just think this is overwhelming. Like there's a lot going on, and where do I start to even try to understand all of the changes that are being made? From the start, you talked about the partisan affiliation for school board members. A lot of parents may not be happy that school board membership could be tied to a specific political party, because this person might be great for my child's district or their school, but they may not have the same affiliation with them on a policy level or a political level. So for a parent, it can be overwhelming sometimes, just trying to know what is the right information, because sometimes things just come left or right, or the average parent might not know what happens until after it's already happened. So as a parent, it could be quite overwhelming. Certain things can be interesting, but it can be overwhelming with a lot of the choices.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine so. And then shifting back to Cindy. So in terms of implementing new policies introduced by current education bills, what challenges might the district face? And how does the district plan to address these challenges to ensure a smooth transition and to maintain educational continuity?
Thanks, Rachel. That's, of course, a great question. I'll give you 3 examples of things that we're watching. One is we're watching the budgeting process, because the House and the Senate budgets are quite different at this point. They will need to go through a reconciliation process. And so we're watching that, because until that happens, we really don't know what we're working with, how much we're working with, how we're going to get it. The House bill repeals some of the categoricals, so some of the categories that are money, and lumps them in bigger categories or bigger lines. And it also retains what used to be Florida Empowerment or Family Empowerment Scholarship, which is now going to be the voucher program or the other scholarship program. It keeps that in the district budget. That's not money that we have access to. It kind of flows through us and out into that scholarship program. The Senate budget actually maintains the categoricals and removes the scholarship funding from our budget. We're trying to find out if by removing the scholarship funding, that also removes all of our administrative responsibilities as well. So we're waiting to see how this works out. Obviously, we're speaking into it as well. Once we know what the budgets look like, then we will know. But right now, they're so far apart, it's hard to predict. As far as 2 pieces of legislation, HB1 and SB 202 were the big ones. And we're wondering what our responsibility is going to be with regards to the scholarship students. There were some wins in there, like the temporary certification moving from 3 to 5 years, which is going to be helpful. And that was a direct ask from our human resources department. And so, so there are some wins in there, but we're waiting to see what our responsibility is going to be. HB 733, SB 1112 is the one that I mentioned in my for the record comments at the end of the meeting last Tuesday night. And that is school start times. And that would be mandating that middle school could not start before 8 o'clock and high school could not start before 8:30 in the morning, which would cause a drastic shift to our school schedule. I think it is a well-intentioned bill. It's aimed at getting, based on research that teenagers need more sleep. It's aimed at helping improve performance and attendance by letting teenagers have that later start time. I would say that it's inconclusive to know whether that actually is, that correlation is going to happen or not. What we can predict is it will throw our transportation system into an upheaval. We currently provide busing for our magnet students, and we are able to have our first run, which is our high school buses, pick up students, take them to the high school. The magnet students, we use those high schools as hubs. So the magnet students will reshuffle and go on to buses to get them to their schools. That, if we had high school starting after 8:30, that would make magnet busing very, very difficult. So we're looking at alternatives and how we would make that work. There's so many ways that this is going to throw our transportation system into upheaval. But the bigger issue is that this really is a local issue. And that has been something that we have talked about with a variety of bills, is the erosion of local control. So school start times seems like that should be a local issue, that a locally elected school board in conjunction with community input should be able to decide. Orange County looked at doing this and put out a survey, and overwhelmingly their community members and their students wanted to keep things the way they were, which was the earlier high school schedule. So, so that would be one way to think about that too, is the local control issue. With this bill, they're proposing a 3-year delay and potential funding to help with that. It could be brought up next session, and if you don't know, next year, with it being an even year, the session will be in January, starting in January. So committee meetings will start pretty early in the fall. So even if this passes, there may be an opportunity to start working on it again and make some adjustments. So I guess we're in a wait and see We're planning on contingencies, and we're also planning ahead for the next legislative session.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing. And so that you're kind of mentioned the note about the GK waivers, and that kind of leads me to my next question for Nick. As a member of the steering committee for recruiting, retaining diverse male teachers, you've heard some of the concerns regarding teacher loss due to certification requirements. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And do you have any thoughts on how we still ensure there are qualified teachers in the classroom?
So that's somewhat of a double-edged sword, because you want to make sure that you have qualified professionals in front of students, but at the same time, you don't want to make the track to being a teacher so arduous that you can't complete it. So at this, there's a fine line that you need to keep in mind, that it shouldn't be, like brain surgery to become a teacher, and it also shouldn't be a walk in the park either. I went to school for 4 years, and then I took the tests and I passed them, and I feel like everybody else should have to do the same, as at least pass the test. But sometimes the test verbiage is very, I don't know, it's very hard to understand. It's if you're not in the education world, some of those words don't make sense. Some of the acronyms don't make sense. Some of the theories and the theologists, they don't make sense. So I really appreciate the fact that we're pushing for a 5-year temporary certificate, because it gives you that time in the field to learn some things and possibly pass those tests while you're working. If you're coming from another career, or if you're struggling to pass those during your college time. But then, so that's a hurdle there, just to be hired. But then, as far as ensuring that we have qualified teachers is just, what qualifications are we accepting from out of state? What qualifications are we accepting from the different colleges that are in state? There's a wide variety of what each college accepts and what each college puts a student through. For example, I went to FSCJ, and what I had to do in my internship was a lot different than what somebody had to do at UNF. So the uniformity of what education background student brings to the table there's a wide variety. So that in itself, I guess that's what the tests do, is they streamline what we bring to the table. But I think that the verbiage could be a little bit different, and it could be changed to be a little bit more user friendly. I also think that the earlier that people start taking these tests, the better. If you know that you're going to be a teacher, start taking these tests right out of high school. And the more exposure you have to those tests, the easier they will become to take if you have to take them again. Fortunately, I didn't have to take them multiple times, but I've heard of friends that have had to take them for more than 10 years and they struggled. And, thankfully for the temporary certificates, they were able to keep their employment, but that's not the ideal path to get your certification.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing just like that close perspective to this issue. And so moving again back to Marcus, what role can parents play in supporting the implementation of new policies introduced by current education bills? How can parents collaborate with teachers and the district to foster a positive learning environment that meets the needs of all students?
Wow, there's so much that has been said so far. Even thinking about some of the things Nick talked about, bringing in and recruiting teachers into the classroom. Interesting for me, I have 4 daughters, each one on each level. I have 2 in elementary school, 1 in middle school, and 1 in high school. And I think about my oldest in high school, how in her core classes, all through her 4 years of high school, she had either a sub or a revolving door with a teacher. As a parent, that's concerning. What should I do? I don't value a core subject over an elective subject. I just feel like you should have a quality teacher, just period. Nothing, not a comma, just period. You should have a quality teacher in every classroom. And then I listened to the the edits, for lack of a better word, to bring into teachers or to convince people to come into education. As a parent, I don't want someone who just woke up tomorrow and said, I want to be a teacher. I have 60 hours of credit. Let me go over here and apply to be a teacher. But you have no type of background or working with kids or any type of thing. You know, a broad example, but it makes me think of, if I'm an accountant, then the next day you're a surgeon. Like, you can't just transfer fields so easily, except, you know, with education. You know, it's like we want people to come in, but at the same time, do we want quality or do we want just a quantity? You know, what do we really want for educators? And, you know, as a parent, I'm concerned. So even with, although the legislators, like I said before, it can be overwhelming. I encourage parents to read themselves full. You have to read yourselves full. You can't just take the word of someone you trust or someone you know. You have to become familiar with the documents, with the legislators, with everything that's going on, because once it's already passed, it's pretty much there. So I encourage parents. I see myself as a plug to my community, letting people know what's going on, because I know some parents will never know what's going on if I don't tell them. So sometimes on my Facebook, IG, Twitter, I'm always throwing out different things that's going on. I have random conversations with people in the neighborhoods and the districts that I live in, because they don't know. I think about, I stay in the Lake Forest district, and they just sold the Lake Forest elementary schools. And I was talking to some of my neighbors about it, and they had no clue. Like, they knew the school was closed. And I was like, yeah, there's an apartment complex about to be built. And they was like, what? They had no clue of different things that are transpiring in their own community. So I kind of take on that burden of letting people in my neighborhood, in my city. I've been born and raised in Jacksonville. Telling my age, I'll be 40 this year. Jacksonville has been my home for 40 years, and I try to make it my business to let people know what's going on, because they don't a lot of times. And it's not at no one's fault that they don't know, but I have to encourage people to read yourselves full. If you think something's going on, read about it. If you're hearing all of these notifications about legislators being changed, things being changed, ask questions, go to meetings, find out. And those are the best ways that I can support my family, my girls, and support my community and support Jacksonville as a whole, is encouraging everyone to read themselves full and becoming that plug or that source of resource for those who may not know the information or have no way of getting the information.
Thank you so much for sharing, and just such good points in perspective. And I'm so happy that we were able to hear perspectives from so many different, you know, areas and different stakeholders looking at the same issues, right? So I'm going to pass it off to Casey, who's going to facilitate some audience Q&A. So feel free to get your questions ready if you have any for our incredible panelists.
Thank you very much, Rachel and panelists. So just as a reminder, the Q&A button should be down at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, press that little more ellipses button, it should pop up, and submit your questions right in there. Also, if you're watching live on Facebook right now, submit your questions there, as our dear friend Amy is monitoring that chat as well. Now, we do have a few questions that have been submitted thus far. And the first one is for Cindy. So this question is, so Cindy, what is the difference between House Bill 1 that has now passed and the school vouchers policies that were in place in Florida in school year 2021 to 2022?
So HB 1 and SB 202 are identical bills, and I know that's not what you're asking, but HB 1 and SB 202 are identical bills. Some of the main differences are, I would just say, more. They have, in those bills, they have increased the income level. They have increased who is eligible the pool of who is eligible to receive a scholarship. There was a percentage increase in the value of the scholarship as well. And those were kind of the headlines of it. There were some things in there like adding the temporary certification, but for the most part, it is more people eligible, a little more money, higher threshold, income threshold. There are some changes for homeschool families, for access and eligibility for homeschool families. What there does not seem to be more of, there doesn't seem to be more accountability, and there doesn't seem to be more assessment, which is what we've been asking for. We've been asking for public funds to be treated the same way. So if accountability and assessment are important for public funds spent in public schools, whether public traditional or public charter, then accountability and assessment should be important for public funds that are being used in private schools or in homeschool. And that does not seem to be really that prevalent in HB1 and SB 202.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate that. This next question is, let's see, it is for Marcus, Mr. Smothers. Are there things you'd like to see the state legislature or local leaders address that they currently are not? Oh, you're muted.
I got it. Address that they currently are not. Is that for the school board or for who, or legislative, for who to address it?
They just said state legislators in particular, so probably reps and senators. And local leaders, so school board as well.
Yeah. I think they do a job at presenting what can be presented. And I'm not trying to sound as no way political as at all, but from a leader standpoint, I do understand when I'm in certain seats, there's certain things that I'm allowed that I can or cannot say. And that's just a truth about a matter. So if I'm on a school board or if I'm on a legislative seat, there are certain dispositions that I may or may not be able to have publicly about something because sometimes my public influence can't come. And I think a lot of that goes back to parents have to, or people, myself, have to become a self-advocate to find those things that are going on and kind of force the hand of those questions. So if the question is asked, then are you not going to answer it versus me waiting on you to just say it, if that makes sense. So I think school board members or legislators say what they can and what they are, I don't want to say prompted or sometimes provoked, because if you ask the right questions, then sometimes it's kind of hard to hide behind the right question or the consistency of that question. I hope I made sense I hope that kind of made sense.
Yeah, appreciate that, Marcus.
And I hope the person is actually feels like I answered their question. I hope they do. And if not, they can restate the question or just let me know if there's more to it that they want, and I could dig back into it.
All right, excellent. And I have another question here. Another question coming in hot for Mr. Nick Nelson. So they said that there is so much happening this legislative session. How much do local teachers currently know about the policy changes being proposed / passed this year? And do you have thoughts about how their expertise could benefit good policy decision-making?
All right, so the first part of that question, I might need you to repeat the second part, but the first part is we know what we want to know as far as we do our digging. You know, it's not like, I mean, we get our emails and we get our weekly briefings and things like that that come out, but we're busy. So we have to go and do our own homework on these bills and generate our own opinions on them. And sometimes our opinions don't go with what's the popular opinion, just because we're in the trenches, and it affects us daily. It affects the way that we live our lives outside of school. A lot of us are also parents of students, so these decisions don't just affect us as employees or educators, they affect us as parents and family members. So it's a big deal. It's definitely. So what was the second part of the question, Casey?
Second part was, do you personally have thoughts about how their expertise, the teacher's expertise, could benefit good policy decision making?
Well, I feel as though at times teachers' voices are overlooked just because we are so close to the student body that we're overlooked as a whole in society. But in these situations, we're overlooked because our voices aren't usually heard, just because we're told what to do, we're told what to teach, and that's just how we earn our living. But personally, and I'm careful with my personal opinions here, but personally, I feel that giving teachers more of a voice will definitely help. Teachers feeling more empowered. Feeling more empowered to take part in these policy changes, or to take part in politics, not to shy away from it. I think that would definitely steer things in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. And Marcus, you mentioned in the comments that you had another comment. So I'm gonna bring the mic back over to you.
No problem. Thank you. And I'm being mindful to keep my parent hat on tonight, and not my educator hat, previous educator, classroom teacher as well. As parents, we look for certain type of transparency. And I reminded myself of a conversation I had with another parent the other day. And we'll look at TV and we'll look at the news, and we hear things about, we poll parents about how they feel about certain things. And certain parents who I know, they look and say, did you ever get polled about any of these things that they say they poll people about? And we're always like, I've never met someone who said that they were a part of the poll that came out that talks about how the parents in Jacksonville feel about a certain topic. So I'm always interested to know details about who are the parents that are being polled, because it almost seems as if the parents in my community are the ones who I know, they are never part of this massive poll of research that just came out and is sometimes used to justify a decision that is being made. So sometimes I'm like, how broad are these polls of collection today? So that was my comment on another transparency piece.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I have a lot of other questions coming in here. I'm going to pivot back to you, Vice Chair Pearson, and this question is for you. So, where can community members find out more about the legislation the district is asking for, and what can we do to support the issues we care about?
Awesome, thank you. Well, our legislative platform is on the school board website, and if I can figure it out, I will put the link in the chat for you. But if you just Google DCPS legislative platform 2023, it should take you right to that. So that's where you can find what our priorities are. If you wanted to know what FSBA priorities are, Florida School Board Association, you can do the same thing. Google FSBA legislative priorities 2023, and you should get to that. And what was the second part of that?
It was, let me see if I can find it. Second part, apologies here. And what can we do to support the issues we care about? What's the second?
Okay, awesome. So what Mr. Smothers said about reading, and learning about the issues and then engaging is spot on. Two resources that I use are, I use the Florida Politics website, which is kind of a collection of what's going on in politics in Florida. There is a good summary on Friday and Sunday. One's called Sunburn and the other one is, I think, Brunch or something like that. But then also there are articles throughout the week. And so the way I use that is I'll read what's there. And then if I want to actually read the bill and read the pathway of the bill, I go to myfloridahouse.gov and use the search engine there to pull up HB, which would be House Bill and the number, SB would be Senate Bill and the number. And when you get to that, there's a lot of information there, and there's a way to look at the hearings or like look at past hearings. You can find where a bill, like which committees a bill is scheduled to go into, the pathway, where the bill is in the committee structure, if it's gone to the House floor vote, what the vote count was on them. It will give you the companion bill. So if it's a House bill, you can click on the Senate bill. You can click on the text of the bill and actually read the bill. There are some bills like this HB1 that I printed out and then just highlighted. And I highlighted all the things in it that I would want to change and sent all those changes to the FSBA lobbyist that we work with and said, you know, can you get any of these, can you make any of these happen? And so those are two resources that I use. I would say when you reach, oh, the other part of that is you'll learn the bill sponsor. You can click and get the email address for the bill sponsor. For the committees that those bills are going to go to, you can click and find the committee members for those who are going to be hearing those bills. And I would say reach out to them by email. I would discourage you from using a formatted or a chain email. I would make your email original. And policy is all about language. And so just like I said, I read through the bill and I picked out specific language that I wanted to see changed, and then was advocating for that language to be changed. So just to say, I don't like this, I don't think it's going to work, it's a bad bill, is not effective, and it's not going to change anyone's mind. To use inflammatory statements like you're taking money away from public education is not going to get you anywhere with this legislature. However, if you can pick out specific things, when I talk to students, I talk about pulling a thread, right? And so, you know, if you have a sweater or something and that there's one little thread and you start pulling it, you can unravel half a sleeve by pulling a thread. Look for those threads to pull. Look for those little things that are specific language that you can offer a substitute for, and make your case on those things. But generalized statements, inflammatory statements are not going to get you anywhere.
Thank you so much for that, Cindy. All right, so we just got our first question for all the panelists. So we can go in this order. We can go, let's see, like Marcus, Nick, Cindy. And I'm going to go ahead and fire away here. So question for any or all the panelists: how are students' voices being centered or even represented in these conversations? And part two is, so much of the narrative around education is adults talking to and with adults about how students are being taught, engaged, and impacted. But what about the students' opinions and insights? So I'll repeat the first half of that. So how are students' voices being centered or even represented in these conversations? Nick, I'll start with you.
I'm not too sure how to answer that accurately. I do know that we do climate surveys for students at the school level, and they're able to voice their, give a voice about how their education is going and the climate in the school. So that gives a little bit of data as to what can be improved. As a second grade teacher, there's not much that a 7 or 8 year old's input is going to help to change policy, but there's really not much that I see on a elementary level that gives children's voice other than the student survey that I just mentioned. But I do think that as students get older into 10th, 11th, 12th grade, those student climate surveys are much more impactful. Their opinions have a lot more weight because they've been in the school system longer. They also have a lot more pressing issues. So that data then pushes for better legislation.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. And Marcus, I'll pivot to you with the same question as our parent voice. How are students' voice being represented in these conversations, and how students are being taught, engaged, impacted? What about their opinions and insight?
It's always interesting when we ask how are students' voices represented, because a straightforward answer is they're not. For most times, they're not. It's almost like what Nick said. How do you get the input from a second grader about how a second grader should be taught? Or how do you get the input from a kindergartner on how a kindergartner should be taught? I don't think we'll never get that answer, but I do think that's why it's very important that we do get input from those close to those situations, or those people who are close to second graders, or those people who have experience with working with second graders. It's almost impossible, thinking about asking someone, well, what is the best way a teacher should work or connect with a second grader or a primary student, kindergarten through third grade student, pre-K primary student, and you ask someone who probably had nothing but business experience. That person might give you something that they read from another article, but not from something that they've experienced. But if I take a teacher who's been in the classroom 20 plus years, 10 plus years, valuing that teacher's input from their sweat equity that they've put in to bring them on a panel to say, hey, in my years of working with students in the second grade, this is what I've learned that's been consistent. And I have data and research that goes with what I'm saying, not to just say this is what I like. That is how you get the voice of a student from that grade level, because you've actually put somebody who's put in sweat equity to work with those students. And even parents, I'm not going to say parents can be sometimes are not a good resource with that, but sometimes parents give feedback from their child's point of view and not necessarily the whole scope point of view. So there's some things that I might be able to tell you about Michaela, Malia, Mariah, and Madison that I know work for them, but in an educational standpoint, I may not be able to cross over in that waters because another educator might see something that I may be blinded to as a parent. And like Nick said, but as you go up into 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, you can start to get some more clear understanding of what these students have been through, because they can really articulate different things that they've noticed, that tried, and they noticed that these things did not work. One of my best resources live in my house, and it's my senior. And right now, she is like one of my best resources for anything that I want to know what's going on. I can just go in her room and just say, hey, tell me something about this. And she runs it off and she ravels off to get that information going. So just to wrap all that up. So I think we have to get those who have that sweat equity, that's been in those seats, who have a given proven track record of working with those students. And then even as they get older, taking that voice and making them feel a part of it by, even if we don't take what they say and use it, I think we need to close the loop and give them that feedback to say, hey guys, we thank you for your opinion. We did think about this, but this is why we may not be able to use this, and this is why we can or cannot use certain things. I think sometimes young people get detached from an older generation because they just feel like they just have to do things, and they don't get the opinions of a feedback or a follow-up.
Well, thank you so much, Marcus. That was awesome. In the Q&A area, building off before I pivot that question to you, Cindy, building off of what both Nick and Marcus just said, we have I won't name drop him to protect his identity, but we have one of our teachers of the year in attendance tonight, and he was just sharing some of his thoughts in the chat. He said, one of the ways we can do that is through student town hall meetings, conversations, and engaging community sponsors also from building relationships with the families that we serve. He also added that this also goes with all in education being approachable. The approachability of everyone in the building might be the true resource. So thank you for that comment. And Cindy, I'll pass it over to you. So just repeat it. How are students' voices being centered on or even represented in these conversations? Or how could they?
Yeah, that's great. I love this question. This is kind of one of my passions, so that's great. First of all, I think that we need to look at advocacy as a year-round pursuit or a year-round job. So it doesn't start in January or March when the session starts, and then, it's over in 7 weeks. It is a year-round job. So I'll approach it a couple of ways. In my role as the legislative liaison for Duval County School Board, I am building relationships, trying to meet with my counterparts in the House and the Senate that my district overlaps with. I am reading and I am meeting with other school board members throughout the whole year to talk about issues. When sometimes it feels like there's a disconnect between the people who make decisions and pass laws in Tallahassee and the end user, whether that be the one who implements the law or the person who feels the end result of the law. So one of my jobs is to try to bridge that gap with our elected officials. I have invited my counterparts to our graduations. There is one that I have said, you're coming, I'm going to bring you to one of my schools. I want you to see a couple of these schools. And we are seeing some fruit from that. We have one of our legislators who's carrying an appropriations request for us that if we get will be so great for the district. And so we're working on this year round. As far as with students, it's a year round also. Some of the things that I do when I'm invited, I go to the JAX meeting, which is Jacksonville Area Governing Students. I mentor a student government group at the high school that my students attend, and I talk to them about advocacy. I talk to them about bills of interest. I talk to them about how to approach adults with ideas in a way that's effective, and it's some of the stuff I shared in my last answer. I also, I can't read my writing, I wrote notes down. Oh, having conversations all year with parents, with people in grocery stores. When I visit schools, I have 22 schools in District 3, and I visit with each of the principals each year and spend about an hour with them talking about and how can I help you are my two questions, and asking about what's going on at their schools. When they invite me, if my schedule permits, I go. I go to sporting events. I've had 3 children in DCPS. My oldest is now in college, but all of my students played sports. And so I got the full tour of middle schools and was able to see facilities that were good, facilities that were not good, access to some sports, not access to other sports. And I'm seeing that on the high school level as well. So I go and observe and participate. And that's part of my role as being a mom, but also part of my role as being a school board member. I also volunteer in my schools. And so I have a goal of volunteering in all 22 schools by the end of the 4 years of my term. I think I'm at 9 now. I volunteered at one of the elementary schools yesterday, and I have some notes from that, some things that I picked up that I'm going to be having some conversations. And those were observations from 3rd graders and 4th graders and 5th graders as I was talking with them. So I think being present and seeing it as advocacy as a year-round pursuit, taking the time to talk to people, taking the time to listen are all things that we can do.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And there are a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to try and find some good ones here to make sure we're spreading the wealth between all our panelists. I am going to pivot to Nick, and then this was also partially for Cindy as well. So Nick, first with you. School choice has already changed the way our magnet schools are able to operate. They now have to host auditions quarterly instead of annually. If they're an audition or performance-based school, and it's putting more time and responsibility on the school staff already. How will having more influx/outflux of students leaving one school to go to another, and then the opposite, students returning to a home school after being kicked out of or failing at a charter or private school, how will that affect the performance of students and effectiveness ratings of teachers?
Well, I think that being a Duval County teacher, you are privileged enough to serve a military community. So this is not something that we're new to, an influx or an outflux of students. We have kids coming in from all over the world, different levels of learning, and also the ESL students that come in from other countries that have never been to a magnet school. So I like to blanket it, you know, as a teacher, you do the best you can with what you're given, and you that doesn't change. Who's in my classroom does not change how I do my job. The children that are in there, they bring their own baggage to school, whether that be an educational baggage or emotional baggage, whatever. So my job is to take that, teach the standard, and foster their learning as best as I can. But with that being said, the district does a job. They're trying to make the curriculum uniform. So whatever page I'm on in math, a teacher across the county might be, you know, within 2 or 3 lessons of that same lesson that I'm teaching in math. So we try to keep it uniform as far as that, with a pacing schedule. Same thing in reading. We have a pacing guide for when we teach our standards at certain points. So students that are leaving one school at one part of the city and come to another side of the town, they're going to probably pick up where they left off in the core subjects. Obviously, that doesn't count for the magnet part of it, but the core subjects, reading and math, they're within, you know, that's why we have the pacing guide and the curriculum guides to keep us up to par with what we're supposed to be teaching when we're supposed to be teaching it. But like I said, an effective teacher or a highly effective teacher will teach well regardless of who's in their classroom. And that's what I really like to push forward, is that be a good teacher. And you know, that's what's gonna, when I grew up, my 3rd grade class had 35 kids in it, and there was one teacher. And I went to Lone Star Elementary, and I did fine. She did great. She had great classroom management. Most of my classes in elementary school were 30+ kids. You know, I didn't come from small classes, and this is here in Duval County. I graduated here from Sandalwood. All my classes were pretty packed, especially at Sandalwood. You know, there were some classes where it was standing room only, and we did just fine. And it was because we had great teachers up in front of us, you know, that took control of the class and had good classroom management and made the content, you know, fun to learn. So that's what I try to pride myself on, is making my class engaging, so that my students, you know, regardless of what their background is, they're going to thrive.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dick. Now, for the sake of time, I will pivot to one last question. And this is coming actually from our Facebook Live listening attendees. So thank you all. And that question is this. Let me zoom in on it. So, question for anyone who would like to take it. What role can community organizations specifically play to advocate for students and schools in this legislative work, especially those who are nonpartisan? So would anybody like to take a stab at that? Cindy, take it away.
I've been saying this in my For the Record and from the dais for months. But we have put out our legislative priorities, our platform, and I will work with anybody who wants to work on any of these with us. I am trying to build a coalition, a very broad coalition, especially around the early learning, the funding of pre-K, the same as K-12. So yeah, I think that is kind of the key, is work on issues that are important to you, and work with the other people who feel like that's important, You don't have to agree on everything in order to cooperate and work on some things. And that has been the approach that I have taken on that. So Pearson C1 at duvalschools.org. If you want to work on any of these with us, I'm more than happy to work with you on that. And then get to know who is in the Duval delegation, get to know who the bill sponsors are, get to know who the committee members are, because those are the people who have the initial votes on these bills. Reach out and so you can work from that angle as well. Would be 2 ways to go.
Excellent. Thank you, Cindy. And Marcus, Nick, do y'all have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say for me, stay when it gets hard. I think when things happen, a lot of nonprofit organizations come, everyone starts with good intentions. I think stay with your heart, with the children first. Let that always be your motivation. Let that always drive what you're doing. Even when it may not be popular at the moment, don't be afraid to go against the grain. I'm one of those people. I use the term poke the bear. Don't be afraid to poke the bear, even if it's not popular at the moment. So I think that would be a great thing for nonprofit organizations to let your yes be yes and your no be no. Like, if you're going to be for the kids, let's rock with it. And I like what Cindy said. If you're going to stay with us and you're here for us and to help our students, be here for real. Not just to be seen, not just to get your name out, but be here for real and show that this is what you want to do, that you are for our students. And there we go.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marcus. And Nick, no pressure if you had any thoughts on like the role of community organizations, what they could play.
I was just going to piggyback off of what Mark said, with if they're going to, support something, stick with it. Start with the end in mind. What's the goal? Why are you getting involved? We're all here tonight for children. That's the grand picture of all of this, is that we're here for children. So if they're getting involved, then you need to understand the end goal is children's success, children thriving. So if that's what you're about, stick with it, commit to it, and you're going to be a game changer or a future influencer. But this is not, children's future is not something to just get your feet wet into. It's something to dive full-fledged in, and that's why I do what I do, and that's why we're all here. So definitely nonprofits, if they're going to do it, please stick to it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nick. And this is the part, if we were live and in person, where I would say thank you to all our wonderful panelists, and then you'd hear actually with your ears some applause. So I'll just say it. So thank you to our wonderful panelists and our presentations today. This has been fantastic. And honestly, to ripple off that last question about what community organizations, what role can they specifically play? Well, guess what? The Jacksonville Public Education Fund, which happens to be putting on this event right now, we have a delightful little parent resource, to share with you all tonight. And with that being said, I'll pivot over to Dr. Shannon Varga, our Director of Data and Research.
Thank you so much, Casey. And I just want to second again, thank you so much to our panelists for that really helpful discussion, for helping us understand what these bills practically mean for the community, and for talking about really helpful ways that everyone can get involved. So just the last thing we want to share very quickly in this session is just a parent resource that JPEF put together. So if you or someone you know is in the process of making a decision on choosing a school, this resource includes a list of factors that were previously identified by talking to parents who have also made the same decision about things that they considered and affected their decision. Just going to share my screen real quick, and we're really just going to zoom through this. Okay. And so I just want to acknowledge at the top, and Mark has actually commented on this, that research has found, regardless of your race, your household income, your political ideology, or what type of school your student attends, that you'd probably check mark these 4 things as being important to you when you're trying to choose a school. Strong core academics in math and reading, in the 21st century, a focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, maybe, encouragement of critical thinking and good study habits for your students, and encouragement of excellent communication skills, verbal and written. But honestly, again, who's not going to check these 4 things? And we at JPEF know that you are all living very busy lives. And we also know that you and your children are very complex individuals. And so there are likely factors beyond these 4 that you actually do care about and look for that will impact your decision. So this guide includes, this broad list of factors that you can review and consider which ones matter most to you and your children if you're in this position of having to make a decision. And then there are just some sample questions in here and connections to research for each of the topics. So we're just going to zoom through, give you a little preview of the topic areas, and then we'll let you all get back to your Tuesday nights. So here are the additional priority areas that I talked about. So the strong core academics, of course, and the emphasis on STEM, but we also have some questions about non-core academic offerings, questions about the specific extracurricular activities that your student or your child is interested in or passionate about. But also, if you want to broaden their horizons, there's a question about broadening extracurricular interests. There's questions about student belonging. Will my child be seen, heard, and respected here? You may prioritize that. There is a section on student to school personnel ratio. Some folks find that really important. There's a section about values, about what the school believes is the purpose of schooling and how they'll handle any kind of behavioral issues. There's a question about communication. How are they going to talk to parents? How often are they going to be treated as partners or problems when they need to be communicated with? There's a question about involvement. Again, there are levels to the way that parents can be involved, and what does the school believe, parents' role really is, and that just might be important for you to determine ahead of time. And then there's a section on teacher quality and relationships, which is actually about retention. And this goes to the point that Marcus Smothers was making about, is there going to be a revolving door at your school? And how do you actually know if the teachers in your school are high quality? And so those are all of the topics that are in this guide. And I just want to say, again, they're not all going to matter equally to you and your child. So there's no need to reference this guide in its entirety. You can just feel free to take whatever resonates with you. So just thank you all for the time to just preview that really quickly, and please check out the guide. It's another thing to add to your list of reading if you're trying to read things about this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Varga. And, just to let y'all know, is Dr. Shannon Varga and Rachel Duff, who really spearheaded the development of that parent resource. So excellent stuff. And I don't know about you, but I wasn't able to fully memorize everything that Dr. Varga shared right there. So you're in luck, because tonight, because you attended our advocacy night, you will be the first people to obtain this parent resource, and not only have it for yourself, but to share it with other people in your network that are not only parents, but prospective parents as well. So I think that'd be a lovely addition to the end of this evening. And with nothing else to say at this point, I think all I will say is, on behalf of the Jacksonville Public Education Fund and on behalf of our panelists and presenters, thank you everyone for coming and spending time with us on your Tuesday evening. And I encourage, continued engagement, just like all of our panelists spoke on tonight, with your legislators. Cindy gave a lot of good advice on how to do that. And if you wanted another route to do that as well, please feel free to go to the Jacksonville Public Education Fund's website at jaxpef.org and visit our advocacy center for the contact information of all your local legislators. So I believe that's a nice way to adjourn tonight. So thank you, everyone, and we'll be in touch, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Good night. Good night.